December 7, 1987, a routine flight from Los Angeles to San Francisco suddenly goes silent. Minutes later, a shockwave of destruction rips through a remote hillside in California. No survivors. But this wasn't an accident. A disgruntled airline employee smuggled a gun on board and executed one of the most brutal acts of revenge in aviation history. This is the terrifying story of PSA Flight 1771, the deadliest hijacking in U.S. history before 9/11. Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771 was a short-haul commuter flight, expected to last just over an hour. It was operated by a British Aerospace 146, a relatively new aircraft designed for short regional flights. The passengers on board included business professionals, airline employees, and everyday travelers heading to San Francisco. But one man was there with a different purpose. David Burke was a former ticket agent for U.S. Air. He had recently been fired for stealing money from the airline. His boss, Ray Thompson, had been the one to let him go. Burke had worked in the airline industry for years and knew how security worked, or rather, how to get around it. He was furious about losing his job. He had pleaded with Thompson for another chance, but Thompson refused. This wasn't just about a paycheck. Burke's firing meant he would lose his work visa, and without a job, he faced being deported. In his eyes, his life was ruined. He decided that if his life was over, he was taking Thompson and everyone else on that plane with him. In the 1980s, airport security was much more relaxed than it is today. There were no TSA officers, no full-body scanners, and no thorough baggage checks for airline employees. Burke used his old airline credentials to bypass security and board the flight, even though he no longer worked for U.S. Air. Hidden inside his carry-on bag was a loaded .44 Magnum revolver, a gun powerful enough to bring down a plane with a single well-placed shot. At the time, off-duty airline employees were often allowed to fly on empty seats as a benefit. No one questioned why Burke was there. No one checked his bag. As the plane took off and reached cruising altitude, Burke was calm, silent, and waiting for the right moment. A short time into the flight, Burke took out an air sickness bag and wrote a message, a final warning to his former boss. "I asked for leniency for my family. I got none, and you'll get none." Then he got up from his seat, walked down the aisle, and approached Ray Thompson. Without hesitation, he pulled out his gun and shot Thompson twice. Passengers screamed. Flight attendants froze in shock. The sound of gunfire at 22,000 feet was deafening. One flight attendant, realizing what was happening, rushed toward the cockpit to alert the pilots. But Burke wasn't finished. He followed her and shot her before she could reach the door. Then Burke stormed into the cockpit. Inside, the pilots had just been informed that there was a disturbance in the cabin. Before they could react, Burke shot both the captain and first officer at point-blank range. The aircraft, now completely uncontrolled, immediately went into a sharp nosedive. The final moments. The flight data recorder captured the terrifying final seconds of the flight. A rapid, uncontrolled descent. Passengers screaming. An air traffic controller, watching Flight 1771 drop thousands of feet in seconds, desperately trying to contact the pilots. The plane was now hurtling toward the ground at nearly 770 miles per hour. Witnesses on the ground saw it streaking through the sky like a missile. The force of the impact was so extreme that the aircraft disintegrated instantly upon hitting the ground. All 43 people on board were killed on impact. The explosion was so powerful that debris was scattered across a vast area, making the crash site almost unrecognizable. Investigators later found the aircraft's black box recorder buried several feet underground. At first, investigators were unsure what had happened. There were no distress calls from the pilots, no mechanical failures reported, and the crash was far too violent for a typical accident. As they combed through the wreckage, they made a chilling discovery. Among the debris, they found a revolver. Ballistics tests confirmed that it had been fired multiple times in the final moments of the flight. The cockpit voice recorder confirmed the gunshots in the struggle. Investigators soon pieced together what had happened. David Burke had hijacked the plane in a final act of revenge. He had not made any demands. He had no intention of negotiating. His only goal was destruction. The hijacking of PSA Flight 1771 exposed a terrifying flaw in airline security, one that had cost 43 lives. In response to the tragedy, U.S. authorities introduced new, stricter security measures. Airline employees were now required to go through security screenings like regular passengers. Cockpit security was strengthened to prevent unauthorized access. Firearms regulations for air travel were tightened to prevent similar incidents. These changes made it much harder for anyone to smuggle a weapon onto a plane. But for the victims of Flight 1771, these improvements came too late. PSA Flight 1771 remains one of the most shocking and senseless crimes in aviation history. It was not a political hijacking, nor a terrorist attack. It was a personal act of revenge that took 43 innocent lives. This tragedy stands as a haunting reminder of how a single failure in security can lead to unimaginable disaster. Could something like this happen again? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more shocking true stories, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive.